As former managing director of Dillon Read & Co. and former federal housing commissioner under the Bush Sr. administration, Catherine Austin Fitts spent years learning how the system really works from the inside. Now, as the bankers' debt-based money system begins to collapse, she spends her time advising people how to invest their money in true wealth creation. This is the GRTV Feature Interview with your host James Corbett and our special guest, Catherine Austin Fitts. Well, as you've pointed out in some of your other writings, both the bubble and the bursting of that bubble have been carefully engineered and is part of a long-term strategy. Can you speak to that strategy and what's really at play behind the times that we find ourselves living in that require this decentralized diversification?
Well, we've been going through a process, and this is what I talked about in Financial Coup d'etat. We've been going through a process where we've been centralizing the economy, and part of our, we live on a planet where it's still a mystery how the planet is governed and who's really governing it and why they're governing it the way they do. I wrote an article, an interview for the Daily Bell at the beginning of the year where I said, the most important question is who's really running the show and why are they behaving this way? And the $64,000, the answer to the $64,000 question is we don't know. But I can only guess. Let's look at some of my guesses. We have technology changing things in a way that fundamentally shifts how investment can behave. So in the 90s, we saw the rollout of very serious global satellite systems. And between the United States control of the sea lanes and the control of the satellite systems, it made it possible for investment to shift in ways that it never could before, because money never goes where enforcement can't follow. So the technology has been, and the digital technology and telecommunications allowed us to outsource functions globally in a way that we couldn't logistically do it before. So they're very, very compelling economics to shifting things into the emerging markets, and that's what we saw. And what happened is literally in the first world, we have in Europe and the United States, we have a whole generation of baby boomers who've been saving. That money's been piling up in pension funds. It's been piling up in governments. It's been piling up in a variety of ways. Grossly oversimplified, what happened was we pumped the economy with a debt bubble, took huge amounts of capital out of Europe and North America and the first world, and shifted it into the emerging markets, reinvesting it in a way that fundamentally shifted the value of labor versus capital. And part of this was created or made possible legally by the creation of the Uruguay round of GATT and the creation of the World Trade Organization. So we fundamentally shifted the model from one that was centric to North America and Europe and rebalanced it globally. As that happened, though, who owned those assets changed a lot, number one. Number two, one of the things that happened with that, James, that's very important to understand is a fundamental re-engineering of the relationship between the private sector and government. So what we watched is what I call a financial coup d'etat, where assets are moved out of individual households and out of governments and into private investor hands at below market prices. So think of it as a theft. I call it privatization. And liabilities were shifted back into government. And we're literally transitioning to a world where governance of the control ownership of assets is going to be in the hand of private corporations and investors, not governments and households. So, and well, part of the reason you want to decentralize is you never want to be a target. So, for example, if I have everything in Madoff and or I have everything in the futures account at MF Global and they decide in the great game of economic warfare to take out that party, if I've got everything there, I can lose everything. So you want to be, decentralized. If only that you don't want to have everything in one place where, you're a target, unless, of course, you have a private army to watch it. So part of it is that But I think part of the reason we want to decentralize is the fundamental problem is not that we're centralizing the economy. The fundamental problem is as we centralize the economy, we dramatically reduce wealth. And if you look at the different ways we could go through this transition of applying new technology to the economy and living in a world where we're over 7 billion people globally, I would argue that rather than centralize into tight control, better instead to reorganize the financial system so within places, so within small units of geography, people have incentive to align their economic activity with the health of living things. Okay, so 7 billion people are putting too much stress on the planet's environment as it's currently being managed. But what I'm saying is let's organize. If you organize a financial system the way we do so that everybody makes money in the stock market from an industry going up as opposed to a place being more beautiful and healthy, then you're going to have corporations making money by destroying places. You're going to have private investors making money by going into Greece and ransacking the place, which is what is happening. If instead we finance places with equity, then we make money from places succeeding, including succeeding environmentally. And so we rebalance the relationship between living things and financial capital into one that's win-win instead of win-lose. Because the problem with the centralization is not that a few people control everything. A problem is it's shrinking total wealth. And when I say total wealth, I don't just mean financial wealth. We're shrinking and destroying environmental wealth. So the fundamental model doesn't make sense. And I can appreciate why somebody running it just says, hey, let me take control. Let me mention one other thing with the current model. Right now, if you break down how we are financing places, what you will see, and this won't surprise you because the Corbett Report has covered this a lot, is literally the entire planet is getting financially harvested. We have invisible taxation through the currency system, through the corruption, through the fraud, and James, that taxation is more than you could. When I try and explain to people how big it is, it's just unfathomable to most people that they could be taking that much. And it's funny because that's how wealthy the planet is. It's amazing. If you see how much they're stealing, you start to appreciate how much wealth there really is. There's no economic reason for poverty. It's incredible. But I think the time has come where we globally have to ask the question, who's doing this and where is all this money going? Because we've literally reached the point where a group of soccer moms anywhere from Latin America to Asia to where I live in Tennessee cannot stop hard narcotics trafficking because a very centralized group of people are depending on the cash flows from the drug business to finance their spaceships or whatever. So, we've reached a breaking point where we can't afford this kind of harvesting, and not just financially, we can't afford it spiritually, politically, everything else. And so we're going to go, hopefully, into a process where we come clean, where we say, okay, what's really going on, and what are we going to do about it?
Well, as you've said, it is time for us globally to start asking that question: who's doing this and where's the money going? But as you've said, we don't know those answers yet. Do you think there's a time that we will be able to discover this? Do you think people will be held accountable for what's going on, or has the system become so unaccountable that it's completely out of control?
Well, I call it the breakaway civilization. I literally think what we're watching. And that's, part of my job as an investment advisor is to protect people from the breakaway civilization. We have a breakaway civilization whose technology has become so advanced and whose command of financial resources has become so concentrated that they've just stopped communicating or relating with us. You had that wonderful quote, I don't remember the exact words, that one of the Bushies said, and the book by Ron Suskind, I think, said, where he said, look, we make history. We're just going to go off and do what we do. And you can observe and object and write about it, but we're just going to do it. And that's what I saw when I worked in the Bush administration. The attitude was, I'll give you a perfect example. I was, we had a big meeting with the Secretary of HUD, and I was making a proposal to deal with a program that was really troubled called coinsurance. And the general counsel kept recommending that we do something that was illegal. And I kept objecting to it on the grounds that it was illegal. And I won't use the F word on the show, but the general counsel, who had come from the Department of Justice and later became the governor of Oklahoma, said, F them, by the time they win in court, we'll be gone. What do we care? And so there was this attitude of we're above the law. And I literally once said, I had a regional administrator once say to the secretary, the secretary was very angry at him and yelling at him about a decision he'd made. And the regional administrator said, but Mr. Secretary, I had no choice. It's the law. And the secretary said to him, the law? The law? I don't have to obey the law. I report to a higher moral authority. And you sort of had this vision of that group of people and eyes wide shut, looking through the veil. And but you had this attitude of, we're just going to ransack the place and take whatever we want and do whatever we want. And, it's very frightening. And so you have this breakaway civilization, and they are functioning above the law with impunity. And the reality is that any financial system depends on trust. And when you have a group of people operating with advanced weaponry and the ability to kill with impunity with no accountability, then the trust breaks down. And that's exactly what we're watching. And it's not a financial problem. It's a problem of lawfulness. You can't be a civilization without being a civilization. And if you're going to not be a civilization, then you can't have a civilized financial system. I mean, these are very simple, kindergartners get these concepts. And so we don't have a financial problem. We don't have an economic problem. We have a political problem. Who is the breakaway civilization? Why are they behaving this way? And why are the rest of us spending thousands of hours, the average American household spends more time than you can possibly imagine consuming lies and getting hiccup by the fact that their map of the world is just rife with lies. So we've reached a breaking point, I think, spiritually, culturally, and that's why the conversation is now going to get very interesting, because I see people throughout my business and life who are ready to sit back and say, okay, I'm willing to tolerate the inconvenience. Who's really doing this?
Well, that's right. And you point out that Karl Rove quote where he was talking, we are history's actors, and you can write about us and you'll observe us, but we can change the reality on the ground. But I think what's interesting about that quote is what it points to is the fact that part of what gives this breakaway civilization, these people who think that they are have this whatever higher moral authority to do whatever they want or whatever they think, part of their power comes from the fact that people are observing them and they are following them and they are thinking about them. But to me, that speaks again to the process of decentralization and getting away from the system that they're creating. And the idea that you talked about of creating an alternative financial or economic system that's based more at a local level and is more about building up wealth in the local environment and in the local community, which to me suggests that this breakaway civilization can only function because we are giving it our wealth, we are giving it our money, our time, and our attention.